All right, it's being recorded right now. Here we go. So we're gonna dip our rag into our water, and I'm gonna squeeze out the excess. There's a lot of water in this rag. I don't wanna get too much on there. And then I'm going to grab a bunch of paint. All right, now I'm gonna come back to my canvas panel, and I'm gonna start to spread this. Now, that water should loosen up the stickiness of the canvas panel. I'm sorry, the stickiness of the paint on the canvas panel, so that it should spread pretty well. And what you want to do is you want to get it even enough so that it's going to look like a middle brown. Okay, so don't try and get it super dark. Try and stick into that middle brown. Now that's about as far as I'm going to go. So you know, my that's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. This is slightly bigger, but you can see I just went halfway. I'm going to go and get some more paint, mind you, and bring that over to finish it up. So I should have enough water on my rag to really be able to mix this around. Okay. Getting down to the bottom here. So the whole thing is nice and wet, and it should stay workable for a while, you know, not forever. But this is oil paint, so it has a longer drying ability than acrylic. And then see how I'm just kind of going back and forth and trying to even things out. You're not going to get rid of all the streaks, but if you get something like that, I think that looks pretty good. It doesn't have to be, you know, perfectly flat by any means. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush into the water. Now, the paper towel that I have here is good because what I can do is just tap my brush onto it when I get some water on my brush. And that way you do that, then you go in here and grab some paint onto your brush. And what we're going to do is we're just going to sort of outline where our 9-point value scale is going to be. And notice I'm just sort of going back and forth onto my brush to gather the paint. And just like you saw in the examples, I'm going to put a line going down the side of my painting. And then what we're going to do is we're going to break this into 9 sections. So if I didn't do it right, I might have to fix it up. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I still need to make these just a little bit more spread out. All right, so I'm going to start a little bit smaller. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the 9th one, coming back here, I'm going to get a lot of this brown. I'm going to go ahead and fill this bottom one with the paint right out of the tube. All right, there we go. So now you know that's the bottom of your 9-point value scale. All right, I'm going to put my phone in the holder for a second. And I'm going to get my rag. And by the way, I have a second rag. So I'm telling you this because this is completely dry. And so sometimes having a dry rag is going to be helpful. If it doesn't pick up a lot of the paint, which this one is getting some of it, but not as much as I would like, I want to make this as light as possible. So I'm going to go back to my other rag. And it has enough water on it. And I'm just going to flip it to the other side where there really isn't a lot of paint, even though it's stained. So all it's going to do is it's going to break up the paint that's already on the surface. And for the most part, I'm able to lift off all the paint in this square that I initially...
Dry rag.
I'm sorry?
Is that second rag, is it dry or is it wet?
Yeah, I picked up the wet one. I tried the dry one just to see how much I could get off, and it didn't take off enough. So I went back to the first rag that I used to put the tone down. And so this is soaked with water. So I flipped it inside out because the outside is where I was picking the paint up and it has a lot of paint on it. So if I flip it to the inside of the rag where the paint really isn't, even though it's stained, that really isn't going to change what I'm doing here. And so this allows me to get the water on the surface, and the rag is able to just lift that completely off of my canvas panel. So now the white of the canvas panel is revealed once again. And I'm switching to another part of the rag that I think is a little cleaner, seeing if I can just go over this a teeny bit more, a little bit more water. And again, you know, it was soaked and I squeezed it out so that I could get rid of all the water that's excess. Because if you keep your rag too wet, as you're putting it up here, drips will start to go down your canvas panel, and that just adds to the aggravation that you already have as a beginning painter. So you don't want to have to deal with drips. All right. Even though that's what they used to call me in high school, drips. But anyway, now what we're going to do is we're going to take our paint and we're going to go in here, and down here we have as dark as possible. I'm going to just paint a little bit. I'm going to have to get a little bit of water on my brush, and I'm patting the brush onto the rag because there was too much paint on my brush. So I cleaned off my brush so that I can go in here and not get as much paint. So I'm getting some, but see how thin? You can see that the white of the plate is showing through a little bit. And that way, when I go down here, I can paint a value that's not quite as dark as the bottom value. Okay. Then I'm going to get a little bit less paint. All right, so those are my first 3 darker values. There we go. And I'm just going to kind of go back over here where there's no paint and wipe the paint onto it that's already on my brush, and it thins it out. Now I'm going to jump up to the upper part. I'm still going to use my wet rag. And so I got this started down here. I'm going to jump up here and I'm going to take some of this paint off, not all of it. So I'm not pressing down as hard. So if you have enough water to sort of get it wet enough so that it's workable, you can manipulate it and still be able to, you know, lift off the amount that you want so that you can see a difference. All right, so this takes a little bit of doing. There we go, that's better. You know, as I'm doing this, and because it's virtual, I can't do this without thinking about Bob Ross, the painter. Maybe we'll get a chance to do some happy trees in this class, I don't know. You guys ever catch him on PBS? The guy with the fro. All right, well, you've heard the name Bob Ross from me, so maybe when you run across it somewhere, you'll say, that's the guy he was talking about. All right, we're gonna come down here and lighten some of this up. So the paint that's on our canvas panel, the longer it sits, the more it's going to, you know, feel to the touch like it's drying. But the cool thing is it does take a long time for oil paint to dry. Therefore, as you add water to the oil paint, it will just start to activate it. So I'm still using my wet rag. All right, I'm going to go back to my brush, get a little bit more water on it. So that one, I'm just sort of lightly with like a wash painting over this one. And look at, I just pulled off more paint than I wanted, so I have to add paint to my brush and go back on top and cover that up. So that's going to happen. It's just the joys of painting. So you're going to have to experience that and then know that you can always add more paint, or you can always try and lift off some of that paint. So it's a back and forth, push and pull. You know, sometimes you're gonna have success right away, and then other times you're gonna feel a little bit of a struggle, and then eventually don't give up, and you'll get the result that you want. All right, so this one here, I'm gonna use my finger and lift off a little bit more. And now I'm gonna go in with my dryer rag. That way it's so dry that it's going to be more stubborn. So I'm going to have to add, you know, a little bit of elbow grease. There we go. All right. So I think that's giving me enough of a sense of where I want to be with my value scale. And obviously, you know, for these demos, I'm working at a slightly quicker pace than you might want to work when you're doing this at home, because you're going to have a homework where you're going to, you know, select several objects and work in this method. Again, you don't have to make your 9-point value scale as big. I'm doing this for the purposes of the demo. Some people literally do it much skinnier, like ½ inch. They do it at the top, and you can just do small little swatches, so you don't have to do them like these are literally like 1½ inch by 1½ inch. So they're quite big, but gradually, you know, if you do it so that you've got it there, it will really help what you're trying to achieve, because you'll have a nice 9-point value scale to look at as you're trying to put the values in your painting. All right, I'm going to switch to our cone, and I'm going to put my cone so that it's up here, so you can put a dot here, come down like this. We're going to put the bottom of our cone. And then we're going to put the sides. There we go. So that's what we want to start out with. The next thing that I want to do is I want to take the wet rag and I want to go in here and start to activate the paint that's on the surface. Now, if you have a little trouble, what I do is I'm using a clean paintbrush. So the reason why I have more than one is because sometimes it's nice to have a paintbrush that doesn't have any paint on it, just has water on it. And as long as I lay this paintbrush onto this paint, the longer the water sits on that paint, the easier it will be for me to start to lift it off. And notice in our example on Moodle, you know, you have a spotlight on one side, which you guys are going to set up at home. So you want to give yourself a lighting scenario that is going to give you like a half and half So I'm just talking about this image right here. You can see that you have like half light, half shadow. So it's a rounded form. So it's gradually going from light to shadow. And then there's your cast shadow. And then we go into the surface here where it's sitting, and we do a little bit of lighting on the table. So I've just put some water on here. So now if I go in with my rag, it should work in my favor so that I can start to pull off more of that, that paint. So how's it working for you guys? Is this happening for you?
It's good.
Okay.
Agreed.
So after the demo, then I'll ask you guys to just sort of hold up your paintings just so I can see everybody's classroom attempt. And then in the class, if we were in the class, after I do my demo, then I set up the cone on the platform, and then the rest of the class is you doing a version of this from the actual object. Because we're not in the classroom and everyone's going to have something different, that's why we turn it into homework. So we're not going to be on Zoom for the whole class period today. What we're going to do is after the demo, I'll say a few more words about the homework, and then I'll let you guys, we'll say goodbye on Zoom, and I'll let you guys get started, and then you'll have a week to do this painting. So that's the good thing. You have longer than classroom time. And you can send me text images of any of your updates if you have questions. Like even if you just want to show me the objects that you've selected before you actually paint from them, if you want to get my take on it. Sometimes people are not sure if they're picking, the right things. I think I gave you some good examples, and by all means, don't try and reinvent the wheel. If you have a cup and you have an apple and an egg, and call it a day, you know what I'm saying? And then throw in a little drapery if you want to be a little bit more challenging, like I said, and then just go to town. So you're not spending a lot of time trying to figure out what to paint. You're spending all your time on the painting itself. All right, so that's a pretty good half and half, I would say. So now the next thing is we're going to lighten up some of what's on the table around the form. So we're going to come down here with my rag that's wet, and I'm going to curve this a little bit because you're going to be looking at the lighting on the table and the shape of it, just like you would when you're looking at what's happening on the form. So you don't want to just be looking at the cone. You want to be looking at the shadows and lighting that exist on the table too. So I'm coming over here and really adding water because I'm starting to get this paint to start to, well, the water is activating the paint, as I call it. So now I can take I'll try my dry rag. Sometimes I just switch back and forth just to see, is that dry rag can do the trick? And it looks from my camera pretty good. It's taking it off without taking off too much. Add a little bit more water over here. Again, I'm trying to work in a manner that's just slightly quicker pace than you guys might when you're doing your painting. So I would say when you're working on your multiple object painting for homework, in class, we do the demo, it's a 3-hour, 20-minute class. So I would say a good portion of those 3 hours needs to be put in towards this out of class painting. All right, I'm getting my paint back on my brush. I'm adding a teeny bit of water. And now I'm gonna go in over here and add the cast shadow. Now I'm painting that in. And again, this has primarily just the burnt umber right out of the tube with a little bit of water, so it's easy to manipulate. And I'm gonna take my my paintbrush, because it still has a lot of paint. I'm just gonna add a little bit of that paint to my rag. I'm taking some of the paint off my brush because that's nice and dark, and it should be. But over here, I don't want it to be quite as dark. And I don't want it to be too wet when I'm putting this on. And I'm not pressing down too hard. I'm kind of feathering with a drier brush. Now the method that we're using called grisaille, there's a famous artist named Caravaggio. So if you're not familiar with art history, that's an artist that you could look up. But he did a lot of his paintings starting out this way, and then he would glaze the colors with transparent glazes on top of this once it was dried. And all of this beautiful value study would come through those colorful glazes, and that was how his paintings ended up. So if you look him up, Caravaggio, an Italian painter from the Renaissance era or just after the Renaissance era. Okay, so check this out. We need a reflective light over here. That's light that's bouncing off the table onto the shadow side. I'm just gonna use my thumb right on the edge, and I'm going to press down, and it starts to lift off just enough of the paint where it's not making it so bright that it's going to conflict with the values over here. So that's a little trick that I've learned, and I just wiped my finger onto the wet rag, so it's just slightly wet. Go back up there. So this is your reflective light. It's in the shadow area. We don't want a reflective light to ever cancel out what's going on over here. Now I'm gonna wipe my thumb in my dry rag because I want it to pick up more of the paint. All right. Now another thing we can do is add a little bit more brown to our brush, and we can add some darker value more towards the middle, which is what we call the core. So where the light and shadow meet on this cone is going to tend to be slightly darker because it's the shadow's right next to the light, therefore it's going to be a little bit more intense. Now I'm just going to come over here, add a little bit of water onto the light side, just so that I can go in with my dry rag and pull out a little bit more of an intense lighting. And I'm pressing down kind of hard, and I'm going back and forth. And the more that I do that, the water that was sitting there is starting to break up that paint on the surface. And now you have like a light tone, a middle tone, and then it gets dark. And we can soften the edge of that core with our fingers just a little bit. Just sort of feather it into that light. You can do that with your brush too. I like to do it with my fingers sometimes. Because remember, this is a rounded form, so it's gradual from light to shadow. So even though there's a dark band in our shadow, we don't want it to look like the cast shadow, which has a hard edge to it. Now you probably noticed that in the background of our sample, there's a little bit of light back here on this side of the cast shadow. So, you know, look for stuff like that. And we're gonna go ahead and take our wet rag and we're gonna pull that out. And I'm not going too crazy with it. It's just enough to where it will allow the edge of the cone on the shadow side to pop out. And it'll also cause this edge of the cast shadow to really lift off. The last thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of water to my brush. I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit more of the paint on my palette. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here with some of this darker paint and I'm going to enrich some of the background. And by enriching the background, what that allows me to do is it allows the light values on the light side of my cone to appear lighter. My brush is becoming drier the further up I go because I didn't put very much water on it. So the dry brush allows you to spread this out a little bit and make it look a little bit uneven, but that's good because what it does is it makes the transition effect so much better as we're going along. And I'm still going to add a teeny bit more brown on my brush, and I'll come down on this side too. Just a little bit. The beautiful thing about painting is that it's like nothing else. So the cool thing about the brush and the material of painting, like when you see me going up here and I'm really going crazy with the brush strokes, that's the beauty of painting. Let that part of this experience ring through in what you're doing. It's okay to show the brush strokes. I don't know if the name Norman Rockwell rings a bell. If he doesn't, write him down. Rockwell and Caravaggio, that was the other one we talked about. I went to see Norman Rockwell's work in Chicago years ago. And even though his work looks really, really tight on the covers of the Saturday Evening Post, come to find out he painted really big and really loose. So it just blew my mind. It totally, you know, caused me to look at his work completely different. And I had such an appreciation for the fact that he did that. So I'm going to try and get rid of this edge right here. So I want to brush off the water on my brush because I just want to add a teeny bit right here. I don't want too much. I'm going to go in here with the wet rag. There we go. There we go. That's all she wrote. Let me turn off the recording.